Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Johnston, and I serve as the Speaker of the Senate for this year's Undergraduate Student Government. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's town hall, focused on hazing prevention and next steps. Let me begin by saying that we mourn the loss of second-year BGSU student Stone Foltz, and our thoughts and prayers continue to be with his friends and family at this time. These recent events make it apparent that both. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Johnston, and I serve as the Speaker of the Senate for this year's Undergraduate Student Government. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's town hall, focused on hazing prevention and next steps. Let me begin by saying that we mourn the loss of second-year BGSU student Stone Foltz, and our thoughts and prayers continue to be with his friends and family at this time. These recent events make it apparent that both institutional and cultural change are imperative to the future of BGSU.
We talk about what is hazing, how do you report hazing, why hazing is not okay in our community. And so trying to make folks aware of it, I think oftentimes students, little things will happen and students will be like, well, I'm not sure that was hazing. And so we really want to talk about, when there's a power dynamic, there could be a situation. And so really trying to educate our incoming students on what hazing is and how to report that hazing and what that looks like. We also work with those students to then fill out like a new member form. So again, understanding what they're going to see in their chapters, what they should expect in their chapters, and why that hazing is not okay. Oftentimes we really try to talk with our chapters about adhering to their values, the values of fraternity and sorority life, the values of their individual chapter, and obviously hazing is not part of that. And so we really try to work with our new members to understand that part of your new member period should be learning what the values of the chapter are. And if this education doesn't lend itself to those values, then that shouldn't be happening. And so we really try to stress that information as much as humanly possible. Again, it somewhat depends on the council. So as many folks on the call might understand, we do have 4 councils on our campus here at BG. We have our College Pan-Atlantic Council, which is our sororities on campus. We have our Interfraternity Council, which is mostly our fraternities. We also have NPHC, the National Pan-Atlantic Council, which is made up of our historically African-American fraternities and sororities, as well as our Multicultural Greek Council. So oftentimes folks will think of new member periods or recruitment periods happening in the beginning of fall. And for our Interfraternity Council and for our College Pan-Atlantic Council, that is true, as it usually kicks off early fall. But our other councils sometimes will kick off throughout the year. And so we also try to make sure that, as new member processes are kicking off for different councils, that we offer those education sessions from our fraternity and sorority life staff from our fraternity and sorority life office. We also then really work with our council leadership to provide education once they've been kind of accepted into the new member role. So we'll work with the different councils to offer that education. Again, when we're looking at hazing education, there's not one right way to do it. And so a lot of what we do is how do we talk about it in a number of different times at a number of different periods from a number of different educators. I think the student to student is so powerful. And so we really try to encourage or I should say empower our council leaderships to have that new member education with their councils and what does it look like? What are problematic behaviors for their particular councils? So that'll happen once folks kind of get into the new member process. The last thing that we really work with then is our new members is a fraternity and sorority election for all new members. So this will happen multiple times throughout the semester. Again, hit all the different times when folks start our new member process. And so again, that's going to be led by our fraternity and sorority life team. And it's a number of different modules. We obviously had to shift many things online, like most of our stuff these days. So this past year was all done through Google Classroom. And again, trying to educate not only on what is hazing, how do you report hazing, but also educate more on alcohol, educate on the opportunities within FSL, educate on what fraternity and sorority life can do for new students. And so really, we try to hit that a number of times throughout that first semester. We also talk a lot about bystander intervention. I think that across the board, when we're talking about issues in college campuses, reporting it is key, but also that what is that bystander intervention? How do you stop an activity? And so we try to educate students not only on bystander intervention about hazing, but also bystander intervention on sexual assault, bystander intervention on alcohol. And so we try to hit it a number of different times with our new students. The next kind of piece to that is really then working with our council, or excuse me, our chapter leadership. So whether that be the president, the new member educator, vice presidents, recruitment chairs. So we spend a lot of time with those officers to make sure they understand what the expectations are, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. And so we spend a lot of time working with them. We meet, our fraternity story life teams meet with every chapter once a month, as well as then a president's gathering once a month as well. So we have a lot of touch points with our chapter presidents, and in almost every single interaction we have with our chapter leadership is about, there's a hazing component. We're always talking about how do you intervene with hazing? How do you notify folks about hazing? How do you spot hazing? And really trying to work with that chapter leadership to understand their role in stopping and ending hazing on our campus and in their chapter. The other big piece that is different from many other student organizations is that all of our chapters have some sort of headquarters, have some sort of national or international organization. And so many of our organizations will receive monthly visits from, whether it be a consultant or some sort of interaction once a month from their headquarters. Again, a lot of that's been virtual in the most current climate, but our team will meet with a lot of consultants on campus in normal times. And so we also really try to partner with the headquarters to find out, how are you teaching this? How are you educating your students about hazing prevention and ending hazing? So we really try to work kind of hand in hand in partnership with those headquarters so that we can really try to deliver a strong message. The last piece that is sometimes the more difficult piece is, how do you get to the general membership? So not necessarily an officer, but not a new member. And that's always our biggest struggle, because that's also our biggest population, right? When you think about new students joining in the leadership positions, the most folks are kind of in that general population. So 2 years ago, we really started to work with Hazing Prevention Week, which is a national push for colleges and universities. And so we really worked with them and kind of kicked it off pretty strong in 2019, 2020. We actually brought Evelyn Piazza, the mother of Tim Piazza from Penn State, as well as Kathleen Wyatt, the mother of Colin Wyatt from Ohio University, to talk with our chapters, to talk with our community. Again, going back to this idea of there's not one right way to do this. And so they were able to provide a whole different perspective, and it was a very powerful night. We had 800 plus members that attended that event in the ballroom. And so that was kind of our kickoff to the event. But then in addition, how do we also work to educate folks throughout that week? And so, some fun events to educate about information, but also training sessions about bystander intervention and hazing prevention during that hazing prevention week. This past year, we obviously went virtual again. And so we were able to put together a pretty strong social media campaign for Hazing Prevention Week, as well as was able to offer a couple different programs similar to this type of a conversation about hazing that many of our members attended about hazing and ending hazing. So again, always can do more. That's, I think, as we're looking at hazing prevention education, we're always looking for new ways to deliver that same message. And so, there's not a let's do this or that. It's oftentimes let's do this and that. And so, while we have a number of things in place, what are new ideas? And that's hopefully what we can hopefully get some of that tonight, even from you all, is what would be new ideas? What is ways that we can, get that message out even stronger? So I hope that kind of gave you an overview, but if you had specific questions, I'm happy to try to take any of those.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brian. And I do want to give space if Dean Bullens or Assistant Dean Allen, if you want to comment on that as well, feel more than welcome.
Thank you, Michael. I think Brian gave a great overview of what we've been trying to work on over the last couple years. And I think what's really, really important to note, which Brian had overviewed a little bit, is that we brought in students into these conversations. And it's really important to make sure the student voices are with us, because we don't want to program or provide education to our students if it doesn't hit them where it needs to hit them, per se, right? And so we want to make sure we're speaking the language and really understanding the pulse of the student body. And I I really enjoy that facet of how we put together our education and our conversations with our students. And it's definitely something we're hoping to continue as we start to develop new programmings and action steps.
Absolutely, thank you. So being mindful of our time, I do want to note for those who have recently joined, I'll repost in the chat the link to our Google form to submit questions this evening, as well as the Zoom link to chat with counselors from the Counseling Center that we have available this evening, along with the schedule for the rest of tonight's town hall. So I'll do that briefly. Okay, with that, we'll move into our second section tonight. The second topic is, what are some actionable steps to be taken as we move forward, and what kinds of changes can the BGSU community expect?
Sure. Thank you, Michael. Really great question. I think we started to ask that question really early on in the process. What does the future of fraternity and sorority life look like, short term and long term? And as I mentioned before, we brought students into that process right away and really started to talk to them about how do we get our chapter members, our leadership, our new members, our general members to get reconnected to their values. As Brian mentioned, if you're living your values and you're taking actions that align with those values, hazing then has no place in your organization. And so how do we formulate a plan, formulate some action steps that allow students to really intentionally reflect on those values and intentionally get back to their bylaws, their risk management policies, and really why their founders chose to develop these organizations, some of them over 100 years ago, right? And so how do we do that? And over the last week, we've really been working on a chapter recommitment plan. And within that recommitment plan, it really calls on every member of a fraternity or sorority chapter to really recommit back to general operating standards. So what are some of those things that we just need to have on file? And then it really talks about education and history and why do fraternities and sororities exist on this campus, and how do we ensure that you're educating in an appropriate manner, and how do we ensure that the right people are in that room when things are happening, and making sure that there is oversight and intentional oversight. And then the next one is really about empowerment. So how do we empower students to intervene? How do we empower students to report or to say to someone on campus, whether that's a faculty, staff member, or another student, like, hey, I'm seeing something and it just doesn't feel right. You don't necessarily have to know what it is. It could just be that gut feeling and you're like, it just doesn't feel right. I need to tell someone about that. And so the chapter recommitment plan is really going to focus on those things to really help bring our community back to its core and back to a place where students belong and allow them to form that sense of belonging within fraternity and sorority life.
Thank you, Assistant Dean Allen. So as a follow-up to that discussion topic, so this evening we've talked a lot about action steps for Greek life and kind of hazing prevention as it concerns Greek life. But obviously hazing can occur in other student organizations as well. What other action steps or what's the plan forward for not just Greek life, but also BGSU as a community and those other student organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, as we were discussing, the hazing prevention at BGSU, even, back last fall, a lot of it was, to your point, Michael, of that it's not just a fraternity and sorority life issue. It's a major one of the fraternity and sorority life issue, or fraternity and sorority life, and one we need to address, but not only there. And so I think that, as we're looking at best practices for our fraternity and sorority life, how do we also apply that to all student organizations? Really trying to understand, and trying to do education for all. I think one of the big pieces that we've talked about is how do we educate all students about what hazing is and why it's problematic, and so trying to understand the best way to deliver that message. We're also looking at one of the big things that came out of the Penn State situation with Tim Piazza, the tragic death of Tim Piazza, was a scorecard, right? Is this idea of how do we we be transparent? How do we be transparent about our fraternities and sororities, what they're doing well, but then also what they're not doing well? And so this idea of a scorecard emerged out of that, and it's something that we've actually been working on, and we'll be pushing it out this spring. It was planned to go out this spring. Last year we had a chance to talk with a bunch of groups, last semester. But taking that a step further of not just fraternities and sororities, but all student organizations. So if there is a hazing case involving a student organization, how do we put that information out there? And again, not in a way to be like, hey, we just want to publicly shame you, but instead of how do we educate folks that this is not just a fraternity and sorority life issue? And so trying to understand how we can do that, how we can make that an effective tool versus just a reporting tool. We don't want it to just be like, oh yeah, this happened, we put it on the website and we all move on. How do we make that an effective tool? So part of that hazing prevention week was not just fraternity and sorority life. It involved members from athletics, our Office of Multicultural Affairs, marching band, our other student organization members, wellness, health and wellness. So trying to get a good grasp of where are major issues and how do we attack those issues, and how do we empower the right people? I think that's a lot of what we're talking about, because really at the end of the day, for all the staff that we have, we're always going to have more students, which is phenomenal. But how do we empower students to be able to step in, to report, really be able to be the eyes and ears out there when things are happening? And so a lot of our conversation with our organizations is, how are we educating our officers? How are we educating our graduate assistants? How are we educating our advisors? Often we have a lot of wonderful advisors here on our campus, both faculty and staff, and in their role, they might not necessarily come across hazing and hazing prevention very often. So how are we making sure that we're educating those individuals on what hazing is and how you can report it? And so I think as we're looking at this and as we're taking this out, how do we, to your question, how do we apply it to all student orgs? I think how we do it is by trying to educate all students on this topic. Is it's not just fraternity or sorority, you need to know about hazing. No, you're a student in the university. You need to know about hazing. You need to know how to report it. And so we'll be taking looks at that as well. Obviously, there was a much more strategic plan around hazing prevention with our fraternities and sororities, but even part of the hazing prevention, the hazing coalition, was looking at all orgs, and so that will continue to be extrapolated out to try to make sure that all students know that hazing is not going to be accepted here at our university.
Thank you, Brian. I do want to offer some space to either Harrison or Javi if you have some kind of extension questions to ask on this topic.
This was referenced, but I want to offer a question to the three of you on, as these plans and action steps are developed, how are students going to be included in that process? Not just for fraternity and sorority life, but as Michael mentioned, for all student organizations, and making sure something like this never happens again. So
I think that's a really great question, Harrison, and I appreciate you asking that. Like I mentioned, starting Saturday, right, we started after the tragedy happened, we started to bring students in right away. Students from our from Undergraduate Student Government, our Board of Trustees, our fraternity and sorority life members. Also, this need to focus on the greater community, understanding that been outside of fraternity and sorority life. I would hope that we are still going to have some eager students that want to be a part of the change and be able to help us do these action items and these steps going forward. Brian mentioned our campus partners for Hazing Prevention Week. During that planning of the week, there's always students on that committee. So SAC has participated in the, I know Michael has sat on our hazing coalition before. And so we will continue to find really intentional moments on getting folks involved. And I would say, I might get Brian laughing at me, but if somebody's really interested and they're passionate about this, we want to hear from you. And so if you have this great idea, like feel free to reach out to any of us, because we would rather sit down and talk to you about your solutions and figure out how we can make change together. Because like I said, there's three of us, right? And unfortunately or fortunately, we're not 18 to 22-year-olds. So we don't necessarily know the language or what's happening all the time on the ground. And you all have that information. And so we really need our students in order to make an effective change.
And I would just echo for a moment what Stacy's saying. We are really trying to create a space and inviting any of our campus community members to come into that space and talk with us about their ideas. You know, when you look at the research on hazing, what's really clear is it's a complicated cultural component, right? The hazing that may occur with men can be very different than women. Hazing that can occur within athletic teams may be very different than in Greek letter organizations. And it really is about unpacking the cultural significance that hazing can play based upon one's identity, right? Men and masculinity, or the way that it affects within our historically Black Greek letter organizations or are culturally based. And so we really want a broad representation of students to join us and to be able to talk about their ideas of how we can really combat the culture that props hazing up as something that sometimes students believe is necessary in order to be part of organizations.
Yeah, and I'll echo obviously what Chris and Stacy said, and I think as we're talking about implementation of these, you know, having a plan is one thing, and implementing it is a whole other. And so to Chris's point, you know, as we're talking about how are we going to implement some of these changes, we need people from each of those areas. We need students from each of those areas to be able to make that effective. And I think Chris hit it right on the head as he talked about it's going to look very different. Even when we were meeting in the Hazing Coalition group, you know, we talked about what hazing might look like in a marching band might be very different than in a club sport. And so us sitting here in an office saying this is how we're going to do it and it's going to be successful isn't going to work. We need students from each of those groups to come together and say, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's what we see. Here's where we think we need to go, but you all as the students are going to be able to help us get there. And so Harrison, I think that how are they going to be involved? They're going to be the key component to be involved. Students are going to be the only ones that can really make this change. And it's not going to be one, you know, I mean, I think as we talked about it even this weekend, it's not going to be one meeting or one afternoon and it's going to be solved, right? It's going to be hopefully multiple of these conversations to say, what can we do differently? You know, we've seen success, maybe, hopefully we've seen success in this area. So how do we then extrapolate that to an area over here? And so a lot more conversations with students to come on how we're going to implement these changes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harrison, for that question. And thank you all for taking the time to answer that. I think there's a lot to be said about the bottom-up change that should happen, and that a good bit of this is on students to take individual action and change the culture. Only so much can be done from an institutional level, and so working together to find that solution is critical. So that concludes our second section. I do want to pause briefly. For those who have recently joined, I will repost in the chat the link to submit questions this evening. The Zoom link for counselors who are available from the Counseling Center will also be posted in the chat, along with the schedule for the remaining portion of tonight's town hall. With that, we move into our final preset topic for the evening, and that is, what is the current reporting and conduct process here at BGSU?
Thanks, Michael. So I'm gonna tackle a large part of this section. You know, reporting is so critical to our ability as an institution to respond to and intervene when hazing is occurring, right? And I want to start this section by talking about one quick statistic from a 2008 study that was done by some professors from the University of Maine. It was probably one of the largest studies that has been done to date on hazing, because there were almost 11,500 undergraduate students from 53 universities and colleges that responded. And there were two things from that study that stood out to me. Number one was 9 out of 10 students who had actually experienced some form of a hazing behavior did not consider themselves to have been hazed. They labeled that experience something else. They were part of a great bonding activity. They were part of a brotherhood or sisterhood event. They carried on a time-honored tradition, but they didn't call it hazing. The second thing from that study that I want to point out is 95% of hazing incidents went unreported to a campus university official, right? So I really want to I want to start by talking about the importance of reporting. The first thing I want everybody to know about reporting is the university absolutely wants to hear about things that are happening that should not be happening. And there's a number of ways you can report those, and I'm going to give you those. But the one thing I want to stress that is so critical is if there's a situation happening where someone is ever in danger, the first call should always be to 911, right? That university intervention and support is going to happen, but the first thing we want to do is protect someone's life and health and safety and well-being. So I want to put that out there as number one. From there, as it relates to notifying the university, there's a lot of ways that can happen. There are staff throughout the campus that a student can report to, whether it's in residence life, whether it's in the Dean of Students office, student engagement, etc. Another opportunity for students is to file an official report. And we do that at BGSU through what we advertise as the See It, Hear It, Report It campaign. If you Google that, it's going to take you to a form where you can actually document and fill out what it is that you want to be reporting and sharing with the university. In addition, one of the best practices that's out there in the literature is the opportunity to anonymously report what's happening. And we actually have a hotline, a phone number, and I'm going to give that to you if folks want to jot this down. It's 419-372-4293, or those last 4 digits actually spell HAZE, H-A-Z-E. That phone number is staffed 24/7. And again, we will take an official or an anonymous report. And so I absolutely want to make sure that every individual that's listening knows that there are so many ways to report hazing. And again, just the priority of getting immediate first responder help if that's needed. From there, I want to talk a little bit about the conduct process. At BGSU, we have a code of student conduct. It governs the rights and responsibilities of members of our learning community. And when we think about why we come to college and the purpose of higher education, it's not just about intellectual development, it's also about moral development, character development. And this code of conduct is really meant to offer a space for individuals who engage in behavior that's not consistent with our community values to be held accountable. Now, this code of conduct is one way to hold folks accountable. But again, when we're talking about hazing, hazing is a crime in the state of Ohio, and I'm very pleased with some of the legislative pieces that are working their way forward and the support we have to even strengthen the criminal aspect of hazing. There's also civil processes where individuals can be sued. And so all of those processes can be happening concurrently with the university's process. And so reporting hazing to the university would certainly trigger a code of conduct investigation process. And so what's involved in that? Well, a couple things. Number one, our code applies on and off campus. So again, regardless of what's happening or where, we want to hear about it. I've told you that it's independent of other investigations that can be happening. And if you want to check out our code, hazing is specifically referenced as prohibited conduct in section 6B2. And so when we get an allegation, we're going to meet with some different individuals, depending on the type of information that we need to get. Whether it's leaders of the organization, advisors of the organization, members of the organization, new members of the organization. And we're going to be looking to piece together as much as we can an understanding of what has happened. From there, we're going to be looking at, did those behaviors rise to the level of policy violation? And again, very different from a criminal process where the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. We're going to be using a preponderance of the evidence, meaning is it more likely than not? And then we would actually be charging an entire organization potentially and or individual students with the allegation of having violated the hazing section of our code of conduct. If that occurs and a student or student organization is found responsible, again, very different from a criminal process, we would be enforcing sanctions. And those sanctions do not entail things such as time in jail or significant monetary fines, because that's going to be part of the legal process. What we're going to be looking at is at the status of the organization or the individual. And by status, I mean, do we need to be permanently removing the organization or individual from our learning community? Do we need to be suspending them for a definitive period of time? Or was the behavior one where potentially university conduct probation would be more applicable? In addition to the status, the other things that we always look at when we're sanctioning and holding individuals accountable is not only how do we stop the behavior, but how do we prevent it from happening again? And so we employ things such as educational sanctions, workshops, trainings, reflective papers, speakers, in order to help the group and or the individuals really learn what went wrong and how to be able to move forward in a very different path. And so that's a high level overview of the reporting process as well as the code process, and would certainly be happy to answer questions a little bit later when it's appropriate.
Thank you, Dean Bollins, for that overview of the conduct and reporting process. I know around that conduct and reporting piece, a large piece of confusion and question in students' minds recently has been, what is interim suspension regarding the most recent incident, and why is that in place? What's the process look like surrounding that? I know there's a lot of questions out there around that.
Michael, I really appreciate that question because it can be confusing, right? So I talked a moment ago about statuses and that the outcome of a hearing and a sanction could be suspension or expulsion. Those things are assigned at the end of an investigation when we have afforded due process that we're required to do according to things like constitutional law and university policy. However, there are times when the university is concerned about the health and safety and well-being of our members of our learning community. And in order to ensure that we feel comfortable about their health, safety, and well-being, we would enact either what we call interim measures, right? The interim measures could be that all new member events have to cease for a period of time. All events with alcohol have to cease for a period of time, or all the way up to we're going to shut down all operations. We're going to issue a no contact directive where the older members or active members are not able to connect with or talk to those younger or new members, so that while we're conducting our investigation and gathering the facts, often working in concert with law enforcement, because again, hazing is a crime, we've at least put measures in place on an interim basis that we believe are warranted to protect members of our campus community. So that's what an interim suspension is. It's an interim measure at the beginning of an investigation to promote health and safety while we're working our way through our process.
Thank you, Dean Bollins, for providing that clarification. With the remaining few minutes in this section, I do want to offer it up to Harrison and Javi if they have any extending questions.
Yeah, I have one, Michael. Thank you. Dean Bollins, seeing that as a part of the BGSU conduct process, each student and or organization have a right to due process, how can we be more transparent as an institution in answering the questions of a status of where a conduct investigation is, if we can at all?
Sure. So Javi, mentioned the term I used a moment ago about due process, right? And that is that when a report comes in, there are some critical steps that we need to take in order to safeguard the rights of members of our learning community, right? They need to be put on notice that an allegation has been received. They need to be able to come in and read what the allegation that's been made about them is. They need the opportunity to respond to that allegation. And that may even be taking a little bit of time to go back and do their own internal investigation. And so a lot of times there'll be questions about what is happening while the process is working through. Well, the first thing we would always ask is some patience and grace from individuals that we're not ever going to comment on an active investigation because we can't do that, right? It would jeopardize the work we're doing. It would jeopardize the work that law enforcement is doing, et cetera. The other thing we would want folks to know is there are times when we would like to be a little more transparent, but there are some federal privacy laws that do govern especially individual student records and their conduct records. And so what we may be able to say to others could very well be governed by FERPA, or the Federal Educational Right to Privacy Act. With organizations, it can be a little bit different about how those privacy laws apply. And so if there's ever a question, we simply ask that folks reach out to the Office of the Dean of Students and have a conversation with us. We will be as transparent as we can be with you. And if we can't, we will tell you why that we can't be transparent with you. Because again, we value that partnership with the university community. You know, if I may take one more moment, when we were talking about reporting a minute ago, and I think Brian said something that I really would like to echo. You know, there's two handfuls of administrators, right, that work in this area, and you know, we're not in the spaces you are in the nights and the weekends where you hear things and you see things. And to be more specific with you, you know, this spring alone, there's over 18,500 students on the Bowling Green campus. And so if we really thought of each one of those individuals as upholding that responsibility to the community to share a report when they're worried about something, when they're concerned about something, think about the number of eyes and ears that we just exponentially grew into by inviting all of you to be our partners in trying to make sure that every member of this learning community is safe.
Thank you, Javi, for that question, and thank you, Dean Bullens, for responding. With that, that'll move us out of our third section this evening and into our Q&A. We will ask questions and overarching themes as they've been presented in the Google form that's been extended to students both beforehand and during this meeting. So I do want to take a quick moment to paste the Google form into the chat again, should folks want to submit questions. Okay. So our first question for our three panelists that's been submitted is, and I know Dean Bullens, you had addressed this earlier, a study had presented that 95% of hazing incidents go unreported. So what would you say to students that feel that their voices have gone unheard during an investigation or conduct process?
Sure. Reach out to us. Ask us to chat with you, talk to us about your concern, why you're feeling the way that you are, and allow us to talk with you about that experience. You know, I never want a student to think that just because someone has not been charged with a violation of our code, that someone believes that what that says to someone is that we don't believe you. It may have simply been that there was a lack of information that could get us to that preponderance of the evidence. And so please, rather than be frustrated or be silent, come in, meet with an Office of the Dean and Student staff member, and let's engage in a dialogue.
And if I may, Michael, on that one, I think also, you know, every report that we receive that comes in, you know, the different ways that Dean Bullens has outlined, you know, we meet with the chapters, we meet with the orgs. If it's in a student organization, kind of going back to that point, that it's obviously not always a chapter, but we'll meet with the chapter. We always discuss it with them. We'll talk to advisors. So every report that comes in is reviewed and is discussed. And so I know, and again, back to, you know, Dean Bullens had mentioned, you know, being able to report anonymously is a crucial piece of this, and we know that from the study, but it also doesn't allow us to then have a dialogue back. And so when reports do come in, we do meet with the members of the community, the members of the chapter, the member of the organization, but obviously if not knowing who's reported that, we're not always able to circle back. And so again, it might be that, you know, there was an educational piece that was put in place, or there was some sort of ramification, but again, it's not a public piece that goes out there. but every single report that comes in is reviewed by staff and is taken to student organizations, if nothing else, to try to get a better understanding of what's going on. And so I can understand, submitting that report, you don't always hear anything back, but I can assure you every single one is taken seriously and is taken to the student organization to try to find out more information if we can.
And just one last quick.
Sorry, Chris. I was just going to add one more thing. Oftentimes I find when I have a conversation with students is that sometimes what they believe accountability should look like maybe isn't how we've done accountability. And so I would say if you feel like your voice hasn't been heard or that your report hasn't been heard, I would just want to echo Brian and Chris and just say, please come in and let's talk about what did you think or what were you hoping accountability was? And maybe let's have a conversation of maybe why it wasn't quite where you thought it would be. I just know when I talk to students, sometimes that seems to be the key. And, we, like Chris says, we follow due process and the Constitution and all kinds of different procedures that are outlined. And so those are also really, really important conversations for us to have with people. Chris, I apologize for interrupting you.
No, I'm sorry, Stacey. Last point I wanted to make on this is I think anonymous reporting is powerful. It's important. But I also want to say that sometimes that's our biggest barrier to get to accountability. If we receive a report anonymously and we don't have anyone we can follow up with or anyone who's willing to say, yeah, I saw that, I heard that, I will testify to that. We can do an investigation and everybody that we talk to can say, no, that didn't happen. And at times that impedes our ability to move forward. And so, a matter of fact, one of the biggest reasons sometimes that things don't move forward. And so I just would ask, as much as possible, if people would be willing when they report to not do it anonymously, because it does help us so much.
Thank you all for responding to that question. So our next question is, alcohol extends beyond Greek letter organizations. What is the plan to increase alcohol awareness and personal accountability to all college students? And the second part of that question is, do you plan on promoting information about the medical amnesty rule for the Student Code of Conduct and Good Samaritan laws for Ohio that can encourage students to seek help for themselves or others without fear of punishment?
Sure, Michael. So, I'll start on that one for a minute. I'm glad that you brought up the medical amnesty piece, because I think we can always do better about educating students about amnesty. And so for those of you who have not heard, let me briefly explain it. If as a student, you have been potentially engaging in some misconduct involving alcohol or drugs, and you observe some behavior that you want to report to the university where someone could be hurt, injured, killed, but your barrier to picking up that phone and calling for help is because maybe you're underage or you're under the influence of something, our code allows us to give you amnesty for that and to say that there is a greater good about asking for help and not having to worry about the ramifications of the misconduct you were engaged in with those substances. And so, again, would love ideas from the students. We try to talk about it at orientation. We try to promote amnesty when we talk about Know the Code and other days or other programs that we put on. But I think that piece is so critical. Don't worry about what it is that you may have been doing wrong in that moment. If you see someone else's life that's in jeopardy, make the call.
And Michael, I can address the first half of the question around how do we raise some awareness about alcohol education and the effects that it has on students, both socially, biologically, mentally, all of the facets of what does it mean to be a person, right? And so I and several other campus partners have been working with Dr. Faith DiNardo. I just recently was brought into the conversation as she and her team are working through some new modules that for all students to be able to get some education around alcohol awareness and the effects that it does have on students. And so you should be seeing some of those educational modules come through over the next academic year as we get the education and the curriculum in place in order for it to be really effective for students. So that is one piece of what we're trying to do when it comes to raising awareness and educating our students about alcohol.
And I think we also are looking of how do we, sorry, Michael, we're also looking at how do we, oftentimes that's that for our incoming students, right? For our first year students joining our community, but how do we also hit that at different milestones throughout their college career? Because we know different folks have, they change over time. And so, even, and again, I know this is the question specifically, beyond FSL, but in our purview, how do we also make sure that maybe as you become an officer, you do a refresher course of a fraternity and sorority, and maybe all student organizations. Once you join, what does that refresher course look like? Because we also know, right? I mean, if you think about it, even as we're talking about vaccines, obviously vaccines are a lot. Like, what are those boosters along the way? So it's not just this. Okay, you took a education on alcohol right when you got to BGSU. Now you're done. How do we hit that multiple times throughout an individual's college career so that they do keep that, so that information does stay relevant and stuff to stay, it might apply to them differently once they turn 21 than before, depending on what their personal beliefs were. And so I also think we're also looking, how do we space that out so it's not just like the day you get here, you take this and then you never hear about it again. And so again, we'd love feedback from students on when is the right time to hit that, hit those marks throughout an individual's college career.
Absolutely. Thank you all for answering that question. I think changing those social norms is a long process and can take some different steps throughout the college career to do that. For the next question, I'll transition it over to Harrison.
Thank you, Michael. This is a question that has come in not just through the forums tonight, but also throughout social media, our Facebook class pages. This has been a very common question in the fraternity in question on the recent incident that took the life of Stone Foltz. Why was Pike still allowed on campus after their previous alleged and confirmed misconduct cases? Obviously, what you can speak on that, given some of the laws that you have mentioned that protect some of that information, but that is a very common question across our campus right now.
I think, and I appreciate the question, and I think right now, as we're working our way through the investigation phase of this case, I think I would really prefer that we focus on this situation and the investigation. And I don't want to get into some specifics about things that may be out there that could be untrue while we're trying to investigate an active case.
Thank you, Dean Bowens. We can certainly appreciate that answer. We do have time for one or two more questions this evening. So the next question, so are there any plans to update the Maxient, or as it's more commonly known, See It, Hear It, Report It form? It's a one-stop shop for many campus issues. But from this student's understanding, it confuses and has deterred students from reporting because it's lengthy and can be somewhat of a confusing form. Let's see, and then can you talk a little bit about why fraternities and sororities? Oh, that's a separate question. I apologize. So See It, Hear It, Report It form.
Sure, Michael. So I can talk about that. I appreciate the feedback that folks find it confusing. The thought with one form was one form, one tagline: See it, hear it, report it. So whether it's an allegation of a violation of the code, whether it is sexual misconduct, Title IX, bias incident, whatever a student of concern, one tagline, one form would help people get to the right place. I would love feedback from our campus community about any way that we could improve that form, and would ask that anybody that has that feedback and thoughts, that they reach out. Because if the form isn't working, then we need to do better. And again, would love to have conversations with anyone who has ideas.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dean Bowens. I think it's nice to know that there's opportunity for collaboration there. For our last question this evening, I'll hand it over to Vice President Hobby.
Can one or a couple of you talk a little bit about why fraternities and sororities are still permitted to operate on campus, and why they have not or could not be kicked off or permanently banned due to the current situation?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think the one part of it is why they could not be. honestly, anything can happen, right? I mean, I think as we look at our community, what makes the most sense? Fraternities and sororities have been a part of higher education almost since the very beginning. And so I think when we really look at them, if they follow their values, they're amazing, amazing organizations for individuals to get that sense of belonging, to find their voice, to exercise their leadership, and really are strong organizations to be able to help people grow. I tell folks all the time, one of the main reasons I'm here now is because of the fraternity I joined. But when they don't follow their values, when they stray from their mission, when they stray from why their founders formed them, they can be very problematic, as we've seen. And so I think it's how do we get fraternities and sororities back to the goal, right? Back to the mission. I think we've talked a lot about student organizations as well as fraternities and sororities. Oftentimes, student organizations are formed around a single purpose, and everybody joins for that purpose. And there's a very clear mission, if you will. Fraternities and sororities also have clear missions, but they're not always clear to the membership. And I think that's where we try to spend a lot of time. We really talk about values-based recruitment, values-based organizations. And so I think that why they could operate and why maybe they should operate is because they can be very powerful sense of belonging and sense of individuals to grow. But they got to stay focused on that mission. They got to stay focused on those values. And so that's a lot of what we did focus on. But obviously we need to double down on that. And how do we really push that even more? And so I think that's where we're really working to try to get them to be that powerful change for good, essentially.
Thank you, Brian. Go ahead, Assistant Dean Allen.
Sorry, Michael. And I was just going to add, I think when President Rogers communicated to all of us, over a week ago, he really clearly said that when fraternities and sororities do what they're supposed to, they have a valued place on our campus. And he really said, we've got to hold each other accountable. We have to be transparent, and we need to get back to being the core of how do we find this place of belonging for our students. And I just wanted to echo what Brian said. Fraternities and sororities, when they do it right, they really form that place of belonging. We know that they help with retention and academic achievement and leadership development and career placement and all of those great things we talk about. And so how do we really start to call our members, those folks that I work with, and how do we call your peers to the table and say, this is what you've told me you're about. Let's start seeing the action. And I think, when they do that, we're going to, the groups that do it well, we see them doing great things. And when everybody else steps up, we'll continue to see really good things come from our community as a whole.
Thank you both for answering that last question. This does conclude our Q&A for the admin panel this evening. For any questions, and actually the number of questions that were unable to be addressed this evening, we will be forwarding them on to our panelists that are with us this evening and posting an FAQ on the USG website, which you can find at bgsu.edu/USG. Again, I would like to thank Dean Bullins, Assistant Dean Allen, and Dr. Brian Hallmeyer for their time and participation this evening. If any of you would like to offer any closing remarks, now would be the time to do so.
I would just like to thank USG for hosting the town hall and for all of you that tuned in tonight. This is such an important topic for our learning community, and the more that we can learn, the more that we can educate, the more that we can influence, then I think we can really make a difference in a culture that that sometimes, right, at least according to the literature, that is very steeped in history. And look forward to partnering with all of you. My door is open. I'm listening and would love to hear from any member of our campus community about a concern that they have or an idea that they have.
Yeah, and I'll just echo, Chris, I think, and Michael, you made the comment, right? Culture change, a community change doesn't happen with a small group overnight. It takes a lot of people. And so really echo Dean Boland's comments about, the proactiveness of USG to be able to call this town hall, to be in the meetings, to want to participate, to want to make that change. And so, thank you to you all. And for other students that are on the call tonight, really want to work to how do we make this better? We're ready, we're willing, we're able, and really hopefully looking to work with you all to make that change that I think we all want to see for our community, to really get that sense of belonging here at BGSU.
And lastly, again, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I really, really appreciate it. Like Brian and both Chris said, really want to be a partner in making this proactive and intentional change. And how do we, and part of it is me challenging you all as students, how do we make sure that Stone is on our mind as we move forward, right? It's very fresh, and we're mourning and we're grieving, and we all have a lot of emotions around what occurred. And so a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, how do we make sure that Stone is still on our mind and that we are doing the right things, because that's important, and his story and his life shouldn't be lost in all of this.
Absolutely. Thank you all again for your time this evening. I know we look forward to working together as we move on to better the BGSU community. Now we'll move into the Q&A section for USG leadership. This is a time meant to be student to student with no admin or university officials on the call for this last half hour. This is a time you can voice any concerns and ask any questions you may have to your peers on student government. Unfortunately, due to the setup of the Zoom webinar, questions, comments, and concerns must be submitted via the Google form provided. And again, for those of you who have recently joined, I will repost in the chat the link to submit questions and the Zoom link for counselors from the Counseling Center that we have available this evening. Now joining us are Undergraduate Student Government Committee Chairs, Academic Affairs Chair Alex Charlotte, Student Affairs Chair Gil Lutz, and Internal Affairs Chair Chase Williams. To allow time for USG specific question submissions, I will turn it over to USG President Harrison Carter to provide an overview of USG's response to recent events.
Yes, thank you, Michael. And thank you, even though the panel has left, thank you to the panel for participating and the answers that were provided tonight. I also want to thank President Rogers and Provost Whitehead, who were in attendance within the participant tab tonight, listening and providing the commitment to students and changing a culture at BGSU. To be clear, I want to ensure on behalf of the undergraduate student government that Stone's death will not be in vain. What has occurred on our shared campus is something that should not and cannot ever happen again. That change, though, starts with us as students and the recommendations that we can provide to our panelists that were here with us tonight, as well as various other BGSU administrators that will truly help invoke change on our campus. So as we're transitioning out of our panel session into the general student one-on-one session, thank you again to those panelists to offer those responses. Really, as Michael mentioned, we're hoping to keep this student one-on-one. This is an opportunity for you all to start asking questions that you might have not felt comfortable asking as our panelists were here, as other BGSU administrators are here. We really want to make this student to student so that we can hear your suggestions, your comments. If you just need to vent, if you want to share your frustrations, this is the time to do so. And we're here to listen. So as Michael has posted in the chat, the way to do so right now is through that Google form. Just the way the Zoom panel is set up, it doesn't allow us to have a chat function open or be able to unmute specific individuals. So we are going to have our committee chairs taking those questions and asking those questions to myself, Javi, and anyone else here, as well as Alyssa, who will be helping moderate some of those questions that are coming in. Just to provide a brief outline of what has happened since Thursday, March 4th when this event occurred. After hearing what had occurred and learning some of the specifics as an investigation was taking place, various BGSU administration took the call to action to get student leaders together in the same room that weekend, so March 6th and 7th. As was referenced in President Rogers' emails to the community around that time, the group of student leaders included undergraduate student government, our board of trustee undergraduate representative, and then representatives from the 4 Greek councils that currently exist on our campus. There, we put together a recommendation sheet that was passed along to President Rogers and his executive cabinet. In that recommendation sheet, we had 3 different categories of immediate responses that we were recommending as students, medium-term responses we were recommending as students, and long-term recommendations or suggestions that we were recommending immediately following the events of those next steps may look like, what you would like to see happen. That way we can take those recommendations, those ideas, those questions, and immediately push it back to not only the 3 panelists tonight, but other various campus administrators that will help invoke this change that needs to occur. So those that's what we're hoping to have here in the next 20, 30, 40 minutes, however long it takes. I'm sure many of us here are willing to sit, listen, and also answer your questions. But that's what this section here of our panel is planned to do so. Javi, Michael, or any of our committee chairs, if there's aspects I'm missing, feel free to chime in now. But to everyone that is here right now, thank you. It has not gone unnoticed, your commitment to making sure the student voice is heard as we move forward.
Thank you, Harrison. Reading questions this evening will be USG Chief Administrator Alyssa Horn.
So I think a good first question to start with, and this kind of echoes some of what Harrison's talked about, but this can go to any of our committee chairs, Michael, Harrison, or Javi. How can students and different community members, what can they do to prevent tragedies like this from happening from more of a student vantage point, and organizations that they can join and really connect with the campus community to be a bigger part of the prevention aspect of the things we've been talking about?
I can start on this. I think one area, and this was hit on by our panelists tonight, is that see it, hear it, report it form. Really, investigations at BGSU cannot occur until something is officially reported. So one of the things I've been hearing over the past few weeks now is, we hear these things, friends are sharing these things that we think are happening, but nothing is ever officially reported through the university systems that are in place. And that is a huge barrier to BGSU as an institution coming in and investigating allegations of misconduct, of hazing, of whatever it may be. So that is one very important aspect. And I appreciate the question that came in on what can be fixed on that report it form. For myself, and I'm sure for everyone here and those that are listening, that see it, hear it, report it form, it's extensive. It asks a lot of questions, it asks for a lot of specifics, and it makes it difficult to report things anonymously. What ways can we help ensure that that form is more streamlined? It's easier for student access, it's easier for student organization access, and how that reporting process or that intervening process, if it needs to be rebranded so it's not a report it equals snitch, that's not what we need to do. What needs to happen is a streamlined process for all students that all students know is available to them, where incidents of misconduct, incidents of hazing, or any other misconduct can be reported. So I think that's my response, but for the committee chairs, Javi, Michael, feel free to also provide your answers too.
Yeah, just to kind of echo what Harrison said and add a little more context as well. That question is coming from a student that's looking into getting involved. And I think that's the very first step that you can take to help preventing this, is getting involved with those initial organizations, because that's the first step to getting yourself into a position where you can serve on a committee that's going to be hazing prevention. It's going to be focusing on the safety of our students in a multitude of ways. And so being able to take that first step towards getting involved is going to open that door for you to really engage in these conversations that our administration is asking us to help with, that's how you can do it. You get in those organizations, you get in those conversations, and you actively participate and do your part as a student, do your part as a student leader to really make a difference on our campus. And it's taking that first step of joining an organization. We have over 350 plus here at BGSU. That could be joining that one organization that you find yourself resonating with can be that initial step in the door to helping make a better, more inclusive climate and safe climate here at our campus.
I also too just want to add, to all the students out there, you can feel free to reach out to any of us here on Undergraduate Student Government. We want to help you. And even if, we can't answer your question, we can get you in contact with people who can answer your question. And we can certainly point you in the right direction and help guide you on campus. So don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us.
All right, so for our next question, and this kind of goes along with Alex's point, but I'll pose this to all of our committee chairs. How can students connect with their student government senators to get involved with some of the initiatives that our senators are working on within student government?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start off. So every Monday we have our General Assembly with Undergraduate Student Government at 7:30 p.m. And then afterwards, the three committees, they break out afterwards and meet in smaller groups with some of the senators from Undergraduate Student Government. And, trying to bring students and get them involved, that can look like, our committee going back out to their constituents and talking about these resolutions, or seeing things that they heard from friends or on social media and then bringing those back to the committees and talking about them. It's really a two-way street of trying to take things to the student body, but also having the student body take things to us. We try as hard as we can to monitor every area of campus, but it is a challenge. And, we really do need all of your help as well to kind of build those connections and, work to make change on campus.
Similar to what Alex said, we really work on ideas really. And, if you can communicate those ideas to either maybe a senator who represents you, or if you can easily get in contact with them, or just come to GA, honestly, or email any of the Senate leadership. We're going to really reach out to you and try to get you involved in that process. And we might end up bringing you to GA or to our committee meetings to talk about this issue a little bit more. Yeah, me and Alex and Chase would all love the opportunity to do something like that. And we have done that sometimes, but we don't get a ton of students reaching out all the time, but yeah.
And also too, just one thing I forgot, all of our contact information is on our USG website, and I was going to send that in the chat here in a second too. So if you want to, Harrison just did, it looks like, perfect. So feel free to reach out to any of us through the link that was just sent in the chat as well.
And just briefly expanding on that, our website has right on the middle of that landing page a issues and concern form that any student, any individual, any BGSU community member can go in, fill out your basic contact information, and submit an issue or concern that you have either personally here at BGSU. If there's things that you're noticing that are not being addressed by BGSU accordingly, that is the perfect route to do so. And then also located on the website is a who is who section. So you can see exactly everyone that is currently a part of our undergraduate student government and our specific senatorial spots that represent all various aspects of campus. You can see who represents you and who your direct contact is, because their contact information, specifically their BGSU email, is listed on our site. So that is really the best way to get in contact with us. On Monday nights, we have those 7:30 p.m. General Assemblies, and every single General Assembly, we have a section for lobby time. And lobby time is a period of our General Assembly meetings where anyone, any student, BGSU community member, any faculty member, whoever it may be, you can come in and share your thoughts, have 5 minutes to have open forum and speak on what you would like to speak on. So those are definitely the mechanisms that are in place and will help.
Along with that, anyone can even reach out to us on our social media pages, DMing us. and we'll be more than happy to point you in the right direction.
Did we touch on office hours and how to get into Senate office hours, Chase?
So I'm going to see about doing a social media post of getting those office hours out for people to meet with their senators. Weekly senators have office hours where they're in the office for an hour, either in person or virtual. We'll get those posted, but it will have their name, and you can go in and just talk to a senator about issues that you have, and they should be even able to point you in the right direction and help get your issues and concerns across.
There was a question submitted that asks about some fraternities and sororities and going through conduct and maybe getting what seems like a slap on the wrist. I think to Assistant Dean Stacey Allen's point, she had talked about some students believe that like procedural justice should happen a certain way, that certain actions should be taken, and those actions maybe weren't taken.